Hey, welcome back to this mini lecture on Paulo Freire and the Promise of Critical Pedagogy by Henry Giroux. It's a multi-parter, so this part deals with classrooms as dead zones. For those of you who may not know, the great Henry Giroux, he's an American-Canadian scholar. He was a founder of the critical pedagogy theory school. He used to be a high school social studies teacher. He is previously named one of the top 50 educational thinkers in the modern period by Routledge in 2002. He's worked at a number of universities, including BU, Miami University, Pennsylvania State University, McMaster University, my home university, my alma mater. Go Marauders. I love Hamilton, Ontario. I want that on the record. In terms of a lack of vision and critical understanding, here's some quotes from Giroux's article. Most colleges are now dominated by conservative ideologies hooked on methods, slavishly wedded to instrumentalized accountability measures, and run by administrators who lack either a broad vision or critical understanding of education as a force for strengthening the imagination and expanding democratic public life. Do you disagree with that? Agree with it? Why, and what's the impact? Given how large the budgets for any type of size university, that there are these types of methods of accountability and measures make some kind of sense. But unfortunately, I think some of those things do bleed out into the teaching in unfortunate ways. Quote, universities are now largely defined through the corporate demand that they provide the skills, knowledge, and credentials to build a workforce that will enable the U.S. to compete and maintain its role as a major global economic and military power. My question for you is, should universities train corporate labor? Is that what they're there for? If you want to go back to the humanist agenda for universities, you might want to push back against that. Quote, consequently, there is a little interest in understanding the pedagogical foundation of higher education as a deeply civic, political, and moral practice, that is, pedagogy as a practice for freedom. I wonder, should pedagogy be a practice for freedom? I would argue that it should be. That should be part of the mission for it, and that by asking good questions, creating a nurturing environment that's critical, people can not only learn the content, but they can also free themselves. Quote, as schooling is increasingly subordinated to a corporate order, any vestige of critical education is replaced by training and the promise of economic security. Similarly, pedagogy is now subordinated to the narrow regime of teaching to the test, coupled with an often harsh system of disciplinary control, both of which mutually reinforce each other. Do you think is modern education teaching to the test coupled with an often harsh system of disciplinary control? If so, why? I would argue that there is, in most curriculum, you have reporting periods that are pretty quick, especially in K-12, and as a result, I think there is a bit more of a focus on teaching to the test because increasingly teachers are being asked to be assessed by their performance, which is test scores. And unfortunately, there's often disciplinary control that's enacted in schools. And that, again, there's a number of reasons for that. Dawn of the dead zone. Quote, too many classrooms at all levels of schooling now resemble a dead zone, where any vestige of critical thinking, self-reflection, and imagination quickly migrates to sites outside of the school, only to be mediated and corrected by corporate-driven media culture. Why do you think critical thinking, self-reflection, and imagination do not happen? I would argue, going back to the last slide, that oftentimes you're so busy with assessment and teaching to the test and those kinds of impulses that you don't foster self-reflection, you don't foster critical thinking, you don't foster imagination. It's just something that you forget in the sort of day-to-day struggles of teaching, especially at the K-12 age group. Quote, the major issue now driving public schooling is how to teach for the test while disciplining those students who, because of their race, their class and race, undermine the school's district's ranking in the ethically sterile and bloodless world of high-stakes testing and empirical scorecards. Do you agree? Are these the major schooling issues? Do you think there's something else? At the very least, class and race are definitely part of, unfortunately, how schooling is. People with lower classes tend to have less resources in their schools, and there's often a racial component where that overlays with the class. So those are at least two really key issues to think about when you're teaching. Quote, under such circumstances, rarely do educators ask questions about how schools can prepare students to be informed citizens, nurture civic imagination, or teach them to be self-reflective about public issues in the world in which they live. My question is, why do teachers not ask these questions? Part of it, again, they're so busy doing assessments, doing all the paperwork that's involved in teaching, and a number of other things that are necessary to the job but are difficult to take time. Teachers do not have the time. They're too tired from doing those things to educate people to be informed citizens, to foster their civic imagination, and foster them being self-reflective, which is really, really unfortunate. Also, I think these issues often aren't talked about at the teacher training level, which is, again, unfortunate. That was Paulo Freire and the Promise of Critical Pedagogy in his article by Henry Giroux. That was part one. I look forward to seeing you again soon. For later parts, take care.